This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And this is episode 3 of a special podcast series that we're doing live from New York. I always want to say that. During the Commission on the Status of Women, or CSW68 for folks who are familiar with that event. And today we have as guest Lara, who will introduce herself. Lara, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm Dr. Lara-Zuzan Golesorkhi. I'm the founder and executive director of the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, which is a nonprofit NGO that addresses the intersection of migration and gender through research, advocacy, and education. And I'm also an assistant professor of political science and gender studies at the University of Portland.
Wow. Oh, I didn't know that last part. So, Lara, is this the first time you're attending CSW, or you have attended many more before?
I've attended many more before, especially during my graduate studies that I did at the New School.
Mm-hmm.
So I lived in New York City from 2010 to 2018, and the CSW was always, my March thing.
Mm-hmm. So some of the listeners might think, CSW68. Are we making progress? Why are we still doing this? So let me try to be specific. What do you hope, will happen during this week?
I think, the reason why we continue with the numbering is because we actually are making progress,
Mm-hmm.
but there's always something else that needs to be progress made on. That's why we have the thematic priorities every year.
Mm-hmm.
And so this really gives us an opportunity to check in and to assess where we're at and where we're going. And so my hope for this week is to do exactly that, to take stock of where we're at and to, create collaborations and partnerships together and moving forward.
Okay. And is there any specific issue that you as being part of your organization would like to see? Because we know the theme, but is there anything specific that you're looking for this week?
Yeah, and with the CSW, for me in my role as the founder and executive director at the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, the intersection of migration and gender is always the aspect that I'm truly hoping to contribute to these conversations. So in terms of this year's theme, when we're looking at poverty, for instance, right? So to understand that experiences of poverty vary depending on who it is that we're talking about, right? And so that we acknowledge that women, girl, LGBTQIA+, and gender diverse migrants experience poverty, but in varied and maybe distinct ways, and that these experiences need to also be part of the broader conversations around poverty and gender.
And your interest in ensuring that we strengthen actually SDG 5, gender equality, equity. Where does that come from? Why are you passionate about it?
Well, it comes, of course, from my lived experiences as a migrant woman. I'm German Iranian. I come from a family that has been displaced over space, time, and generations. And so, when we're talking about gender equity and gender justice, it's very personal, but also I've made this an essential part of my work as a scholar, as an educator, and in my policy practice, hence why I also teach in gender and sexuality studies. And I also publish in that field as well, or within political science, but then with a thematic focus, for instance, on gender perspective and feminist approaches towards political science.
Okay. I know that my listeners are always interested in the backstory. Would you mind telling us in a nutshell your journey then as a migrant? Where were you born, and where did you go? Did you go from one country to another?
Yeah, so my family is in Iran. I was born in Germany, and I came to the United States in 2006, actually on a swimming scholarship. I was a national champion in Germany and was recruited to the United States. And then I stayed. I moved from one migration status to the next, international student, then international worker. And then finally, after 15 years in the United States, I got my green card.
Okay.
That's where we're at right now, waiting for the next couple of years to pass so I can apply for citizenship.
Okay, cool. I know that you work with several interns as well, young fellows. So I have a question, because I'm very interested in what this next generation is up to, and not that they, I have learned from them is that you should not say you're the future, because they are the now, and we should collaborate and make this world better now. But how do you see the role of this younger generation in terms of advancing gender equity and gender equality?
Yeah. One of the main reasons why at the Center for Migration, Gender and Justice we created what we call our Youth Engagement Academy is a way for us as a migrant women and actually youth-led organization to give back and pay forward, and to say that we were there not too long ago, and we're now in a position where we can provide these opportunities, and so why not do so with the hopes that those that join us will stay with us and do the exact same in passing it forward. And we've actually seen that through the different cohorts that have gone through the academy, that they then become co-facilitators for the next programs for migrant youth that we lead. And that's exactly that's exactly what we hoped the academy would do, and where we see youth engagement being so essential and fundamental to our work.
Great. No, I liked it in terms of getting people into action. So I also try to, I hope, that people who are listening to this podcast, getting inspired by the guests that I speak with, and then ultimately they also get into the action in their, in a small or a big way. So, yeah, if I ask you, referring to what's happening this week and next week around CSW68, what is one action that you would encourage the listeners to take to support the acceleration of gender equality?
Yeah, I think just to engage in the varied formats that it is possible now. So yes, being in New York City is very special, and being in these spaces as things are happening, but there's also other means to engage, and to say that yes, CSW is, it presents the 2 weeks that we can get together, but that's actually just the starting point. I always like to think of the CSW just as a starting point and a point of reflection and coming together. But the real work starts the very day after the CSW, after we've come together, after we've assessed again, after we've discussed of where we want to go next, until we meet again. And so for me, the engagement here is just the beginning.
Great. I want to take you somewhere else. I mean, the listeners know music is very important to me, so I always have a question about music as well. If I ask you to come up with a song or a piece of music that inspires you or reflects your journey in gender equality, which song or piece of music would you mention, and why?
The specific song that I would say is my CSW song, and has been for a couple of years, actually since it came out, is Rihanna's Hard. I am a big fan of Rihanna in various ways. And that song specifically speaks to me because it's about finding your own way and your own approach to achieving gender equity. It doesn't have to look the same for all of us, but as long as we're working on it together, even if it's not the same, even if it's not through the same way. And that's exactly what the song kind of tells me and reminds me to do.
So, you know what I hope to achieve with this podcast and with the bigger one where I talk, you know, with my guests for an hour, is really connect people with each other and that people realize that I did not agree with many things, but there were a couple of things when I was listening to this guest there I do agree, and it would be nice to have a conversation and to, you know, use that as a start instead of pointing at, oh, I don't agree with what she said or he said over there. So I try to put it into practice. So I have always questions of the previous guest, and then I ask you also to come up with a question for the next guest. And I have here a small video for you of the previous guest.
My question for the next guest is, how do you manage your emotional health and emotions in a context that can provoke a lot of anger and hopelessness? That's it.
Yeah. So what do you think?
Well, actually, the way that I perceive this in terms of the emotional labor that goes into doing this kind of work, to me, it's an act of love. It's an act of love. It's an act of love for humanity, for everyone that we share this space with. And so, of course, I'm angry. Of course, there are these other emotions, but I always have to remind myself in terms of like, well, what is it that keeps me moving? And for me, it's love. It's love for each other, and knowing that, you know, we can do better, and especially if we ground our activism and our advocacy in this very, very strong feeling and very powerful feeling of love.
Okay. And your question for the next guest?
My question for the next guest would be to share some practices that they do or that they perform every day while they're at the CSW. It can be very intense, and so I always like to learn from others in terms of like, what can we do to practice self-care in these moments of intensity that can be inspiring in one moment, very frustrating in the other. So my question to the next guest is, what are your practices of self-care during CSW?
So what are your practices? I'm curious.
My practices that I've developed, whether it's in the space of CSW or otherwise, is to keep my routine. Is to keep my routine and to stay grounded. So aspects of this would for instance include listening to music while I get ready. I have my playlist for these kind of events, and yes, Rihanna is on there, and so are some other greats, notably Alicia Keys. But to stick with this so that there is some sort of that there remains some sort of comfort and familiarity, because the spaces that one might enter throughout the day might bring discomfort, and they might throw you off in your routine. And of course, there always needs to be some flexibility when it comes to these events. But grounding myself and saying, okay, here are some of the important things that I do every day during this week that I stick with, have really helped me come out of the 2 weeks every single year and still feel inspired. and still feel so. So of course, other practices are make sure you stay hydrated, you eat, right? Like these are things we, it might not sound like something that would happen, but you forget. You're running from one meeting to the next, so make sure you take a breath. You enjoy. This week we're lucky we have sun, so step outside of the building for a minute, take a deep breath, take a walk. Right? These are the practices that I do that I find to be very important and that keep me grounded.
Great. No, I'm sure that the participants who are were also attending these 2 weeks will find this really helpful. So you were talking about a playlist. Do you have a playlist? Like Lara's CSW68 playlist?
I think it's just it's more of a Lara, you got this list that works for various spaces.
Okay.
But yeah, I have that, and I have they vary. There's some songs that have been added, some songs that have been taken out, but yeah, that would be definitely a recommendation because music has such power in making you feel certain ways, and to have that in a space like this is really important. It's a fundamental to me.
Okay. I would like to remind the listeners that, we have made a playlist. If you go to Spotify and you search for #WalkTalkListen, all the songs that were selected, because I asked, a similar question normally, all those songs are there, which is, from classical music to Alicia Keys to, folk, rock, name it. Because we have a shorter version, during these 2 weeks, I also came up with a number of rapid fire questions. So we go quickly through this. And then at the end, you can come back to one of them where you would like to, if you'd like to give more, context. Okay, the first question is around global perspective. In one word, what do you think is the biggest barrier to gender equality globally?
That we don't see beyond borders. At the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice, our vision is gender justice beyond borders, and I think often so discussions are kept within borders, figuratively and literally in various ways that is not particularly productive for moving forward.
There's more than one word, but okay, give it to you. Yes or no? Can technology significantly accelerate gender equality? Yes or no?
It can do both.
Ooh. Who is one person that has significantly influenced your approach to gender equality?
My mother.
What's one book you recommend everyone reads to understand gender equality better?
The revolution will not be funded.
In 3 words, how do you envision the future of gender equality?
In one where there is no borders.
If you could change one thing about the world today to advance gender equality, what would it be?
For us to understand that what we're trying to do goes beyond ourselves.
What message would you send to your future self 5 years from now regarding your work in gender equality?
You're amazing.
Okay, is there a question that you would like to get back to?
The question on technology.
Okay. I was figuring that. So what would you like to add?
Well, my work has a strong focus on gender-based violence, and I think when we're talking about technology and the intersection of gender-based violence, and then if we want to add the migration component to it as well, we've seen that technology-facilitated gender-based violence is a significant concern. That gender-based violence occurs now in different spaces across all different platforms that years ago was just not the case. And because it wasn't, we don't have the laws and policy in place to address this properly and in a targeted and in an efficient way. And so that as much as technology can be used to advance gender justice through raising awareness, etc., it also has become a space of harm, of violence. that I've experienced myself. And so for that, I would say it does both, and we have to be mindful of that.
Okay. I mean, these conversations really go fast. I still would like to give you the opportunity to quickly, market your events, because you are organizing several. So for people that will be here, this week and the next, to which sessions should they go?
They should go to all of the sessions as part of the first Global Gender and Migration Forum, which we at the Center for Migration, Gender, and Justice initiated with our partners. So it's a week-long series of events on all matters, migration and gender. You can access them in a hybrid format, or if you are in New York City, between March 11 and March 15. So make sure you tune in.
I would like to really thank you for your willingness to talk with me. Good luck with everything you do. Is really important. Listen to that music. You will need it in the coming days, right?
Yes, thank you so much, Maurice, for having me. This was a great conversation.
Great, thank you. Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.